YouTube, what is good? Welcome back to the channel. Real quick, something super tragic just happened. I recorded this whole video and my wireless audio receiver died halfway through. So now I'm recording it again. So what's up again? Basically today we're gonna be talking about this. And no, not this specific camera. You've already heard a whole lot about my EOS 300V. Today we're actually gonna be talking about this. And this is the Canon 50mm 1.8 lens. And this is actually the current version of it. This is an EF mount lens, which basically means that mount that you see right there will work for every single Canon camera that has an EF mount system. So that means these old film cameras from the 90s and the 2000s and modern DSLR cameras such as the Canon 5D Mark IV, for example. Even better, with an appropriate adapter, you can actually mount these lenses on the mirrorless systems as well. So you've got the Canon EOS R, which is what I'm using to record this video, and of course the more fancy ones that have come out since, like the R5, for example. That's amazing. This lens basically works on 30 years worth of cameras, and even better, if the cameras like this one have autofocus, this will work just fine. So let's actually talk about kind of the two key things right now that I think make this lens amazing. Well, I think there's actually three, but number one is the price. This lens is $100. If you get it new, maybe 120 or something like that. But there's so many of these that are used that are cheaper, especially if you get the previous generations. Highly recommend them. Obviously, they're made out of plastic, and that's why they're cheap. And you know, the focusing, for example, it's a little rough. It doesn't sound so good, but you get what you pay for in terms of materials here. In terms of capability, there's no better value than this. This is literally $100, and you can make images with this lens that are just as beautiful as any other 1.8 lens you're going to find out there. But this one has autofocus and it fits on a massive range of cameras. So that's amazing. The second thing I want to talk about is that 1.8 aperture. Shooting at 1.8 is incredible, especially at 50mm, because it's that beautiful blend of kind of entry point telephoto-y kind of thing where you get incredible bokeh behind your subject, but then it's still 50mm, which means it's relatively wide and you can still incorporate some of the environment and really showcase the two, your subject and the environment. So it's an incredible kind of middle ground between the best things about photography. And that bokeh at 1.8, whether it's on digital or film, amazing. I actually think it looks even better on film because the grain and kind of just the subtleties of the look of film just go amazingly with the kind of soft, relatively kind of soft focus you get at 1.8 here. You know, at 1.8 is wide open, you're never gonna get the most sharp image there. Last thing I want to talk about this is the autofocus. This autofocuses incredibly well, whether I'm using this camera or whether I'm using the EOS R, for example. It works perfectly on literally every EF system that has autofocus. I've never had problems with this lens hunting too much, especially when it's at 1.8. That's the beauty. Even at lower light, when you have your lens wide open, there's still plenty of light coming into your camera sensor in order for you to actually get pretty good autofocus. So honestly, I have zero complaints when it comes to this. There are other lenses that are made by Canon, for example, the 51.2, which costs about 15 times more than this. That one historically has had issues autofocusing where it kind of hunts a lot, especially when you're on 1.2. For whatever reason, this one does not. So honestly, I don't think there is a better lens that you can get for the Canon system, pound for pound. This is the undisputed pound for pound champion of Canon lenses. I will argue that to the death with anybody. All right, so before I continue talking about this lens, let's actually look at some footage from when I was in Amsterdam. I was in Amsterdam recently and I hung out with Wesley, who's a fantastic portrait photographer. And I brought this lens with me with this camera and the digital camera that I'm recording here. And I decided to put it against each other. We did some portraits and then I also went outside and did some kind of, you know, cityscape-y, just street stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at the footage. I'm curious what your thoughts are about how this lens performs best, whether on the film or on the digital. All right, wasn't that pretty cool? Honestly, we're not gonna compare film and digital kind of generally, because that's a whole different video, but I really wanna pay attention to how this lens kind of renders images on your film and on the digital. On digital, I think this is still pretty sharp. You still get that relatively clinical digital look that you would get on a digital camera, especially newer ones. So the higher resolution you go, this thing just keeps outputting. At 1.8, it's not perfectly sharp, and that's the same with basically any lens wide open, but I was still impressed at how much detail you do get at 1.8. I mean, let's zoom into this digital file. You see the eyes, like you can see plenty there. You wouldn't know that you were, 1.8 on it. This is quote unquote not the sharpest point. On the film, the same exact look actually is, I find to be more pleasing. Sharp enough, you can still tell that there's eyelashes and eyebrows and things like that, but the lens has this beautiful softness to it, which I think complements the film very nicely. And that's Kodak Gold 200, which is not, pro film or anything like that, but it has, just enough kind of lower sensitivity and less grain, but still gives you a little hint of that. So this lens works beautifully on that. I honestly think if you have one of these film cameras, Canon EF system, you have to get this lens. There's no better lens for it. So those are those. Let's look at some of these cityscape shots. This is, I think, where you start to see even more of a difference because we're outside, things aren't controlled. And of course, the dynamic range of film becomes a bit more obvious. So as compared to the digital, at least. So here's where you really start to see the lens kind of behave differently. I don't know exactly how to qualify it or pinpoint it, but there's a pretty drastic difference here, I would say, when it comes to film versus digital. I mean, look at these examples here. Again, this has more to do with the sensors of the cameras and the film sensitivity as opposed to the lens itself. But, I think the lens is a fantastic option for both. So if you ask me, I actually think when it comes to portrait work, you definitely want to include this, pair it with the EF camera. And I actually think that's a good segue. A lot of people that I know recently that are digital shooters are really intrigued by film because they're seeing it everywhere and they really want to jump in. For a lot of those people, especially if they own Canon cameras already, I tell them, listen, before you do anything, get yourself a cheap Canon SLR with all the automatic functions and simply just take your EF lenses and put them on there. That's the perfect way to introduce yourself into film, to get to know the aesthetic, to get to kind of learn a bit more about what film looks like and how it behaves, especially if you want to develop film and stuff like that. So I could not recommend it anymore. But yeah, I think this lens is amazing. And if you have one, get yourself a film camera. And if you have film cameras like these, get yourself one of these lenses. You cannot go wrong. It is just exactly what you need to do. All right, I think I've said enough about this camera and this lens combo. Go ahead and pick one up. Tons of these cheap on eBay or new. Tons of these cameras cheap on eBay as well. So, you won't feel bad about me making this video and driving prices up because the prices are not going up, I'm telling you. There's just so much of this inventory out there. But yeah, go pick it up and let me know in the comments if you use these combos as well. I personally love these, and this is actually how I started with film photography. So curious if you feel the same way. All right, y'all, to the next video. I'm out.